He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host Taylor, and today we've got a few mysterious experiences we're going to be talking about and sharing. However, before we get to that, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels as well, and if you ever want to reach out to us directly, you can do so through our email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. Be sure to check out last week's episode, though, because Reuben joined us and did a fantastic deep dive into, we had a recently submitted vocalization clip from someone that lives here out in the Okanagan, and I have to get to updating that blog. I've been so terrible at it, but if you want to see the imagery I uploaded into the video YouTube version, so you'll be able to see what we're speaking about in regards to the imagery that'll pop up as Reuben's talking about everything. So he did a great job, and it was fascinating just to hear him deep dive into the research that he did and the analyzation of the vocalization clip that we got. So definitely check that out. And the week prior, I took a deep dive into Roswell, New Mexico, that incident. I found this in an old school report that I did, and I analyzed it, broke it apart, refined it, and added a lot more context to it. And it was a good episode. It was fun to kind of immerse myself back into that project. But I digress. Now, moving into today's topic. So our first experience takes place over 50 years ago, so quite a bit of time. And I quote, "I was asked to share some other experiences that my family and I have had. And in the late 70s, my parents had a fascination with the TV show Grizzly Adams and decided to move my sisters and I out of Southern California to the wild woods up north. We literally packed up everything in a trailer towed by our old trusty Ford and headed for the Great North. We ended up in a cabin up past a small town, if you can call it that, by the name of Denny. At this time, the government actually leased the land to people, and we had 40 acres where two rivers met with a small cabin on the land. The cabin was only 3 rooms, the front room with a wood stove and 2 twin beds for my sisters, the kitchen that had a propane stove and refrigerator. The cabin had no plumbing or electricity, so these items running off of propane was a godsend. The last room was my parents' room, where I had a small bed in the corner. It really was a crappy rundown place. Just to the back of the cabin was an outhouse. It was horrible having to go to the bathroom at night, walking up the hill to the outhouse, especially when it's cold. And since we were so isolated, a kid could do what he wanted, and basically, that is what I did. I used to take my horse and explore the backcountry. I was only 11, but my parents pretty much left me alone as long as I wasn't bugging them. Yes, I was neglected at the time, but I love my freedom. I would sometimes go out for 2 to 3 days. There were a few old ruined cabins from the gold rush days that I loved to explore. In this area, Bigfoot was considered a reality and wasn't questioned. We actually would sit outside at night and listen to them talk to each other across the mountain valleys. I don't believe they have a language, but I'd hear them call to one another. One of the adventures that I had, I was riding my horse Larry, and he was a great, steady, and reliable animal. One day, we're about 10 miles in the backcountry, going down a narrow old trail on the side of a mountain. At first, I didn't notice the smell, but then Larry snorted, shook his head, and that's when I noticed this smell that was just horrible. I can only describe it as something akin to a nasty, sweaty gym bag with a mixture of wet dog. At this point, Larry stopped moving forward, and I noticed everything was silent. The hairs on Larry's and my necks stood up, and I knew I was being watched. I slowly looked around, but could see nothing. But this smell was just everywhere. In a calm voice, I said out loud, "I know you're here and we'll be leaving." I then backed Larry up a short ways to where we had enough room on the trail to turn around. Once we got turned around, Larry wanted to run, but I knew to keep him at a slow pace. I knew from my dad, you don't run when a predator is around. After about 100 or so feet, the smell faded, and Larry's ears perked up and the feeling of being watched dissipated. It was at this moment from back down the trail I just came, I heard the call. I have to admit, I pee a little at the sound and let Larry go to a somewhat faster walk. End quote. Firstly, thank you for submitting this. And secondly, spot on. If you detect a predator nearby, do not run, but leave the area slowly. I think it's very interesting how the detection starts with an animal or a pet, sometimes even the surroundings, as mentioned here, where things just become abnormally quiet. And that kind of intuition and detection, that's going to be kind of the theme as we move through today's episode with these experiences. So when you combine that uneasy scent that kind of turns your stomach upside down, now this shares many similarities to other reports affiliated with Sasquatch. I took a look at the town named Denny as well, located in California, far north, as mentioned in the experience. Denny actually refers to two small mining settlements in Trinity County, one located in the Upper River watershed and the other 20 miles downstream along a one-way county road. Denny also saw a huge influx of new people from the 1970s to the 1980s, and this is, again, with hopes of living off of mining claims. Denny itself serves as basically a gateway into the western portion of the Trinity Alps Wilderness area. And I think that's very fascinating that we see this huge influx of people showing up between that 70s and 80s kind of era, because it goes hand in hand with, again, this experience. So we can kind of isolate the general trajectory of how things were going in this area with people kind of popping in. But in closing, I asked a couple more questions regarding what they heard. And I'll quote their response here now, including a message they requested a highlight, and I quote, "Yes, I heard vocalizations, and at night we used to sit in front yard of the cabin and listen to them call to each other from one mountainside to another. It wasn't a language, but it was communication. We had many experiences with them, most good. But it was well known, just don't piss them off or cross into their territory. Please make it known, while we had a couple of scary experiences, most of them were good, and if you respect them, they won't bother you." End quote. I can't emphasize that enough. If you respect them, they won't bother you. When you are in their home and territory, they will keep a distance and observe, at least from what I have deduced in my own personal opinion. Or for whatever reason, they feel discomfort. I reckon that's when you get them escorting you out of an area. You get things a little bit more heated and aggressive, and a little bit more of territorial display of aggression towards you. Granted, it's my own assumption. There's no factual basis supporting it because we haven't seen one of these and actually had scientists study how these things work and function. So I digress, though. Moving on, here's a quick cut experience that it just caught my eye. So while the woods are not always devoid of mischievous pranksters and such, sometimes being remote means just that. You are remote. And humans aren't always present in all corners of the planet. I think we have to remind ourselves of that sometimes. And I quote, "My best friend at the time, he told me this. He was somewhere outside the town of Cottage Grove, ran out of gas in the woods and was asleep in his van. Felt something approach the van and shake it like a toy. He was hidden under laundry and bedding in the back, where he stayed until morning, ended up coasting downhill out of there." End quote. Now, I'm not an expert on bears, but bears have been known to cause a ruckus to a vehicle over food, and I've seen videos where they'll just smash a door open if they're so inclined. But such an act, it would keep escalating, I imagine, to the point where they would just destroy parts of this vehicle. And if there was something interesting to a bear inside said vehicle, a bear will try to get at it, wouldn't it? But here we have someone hiding in the back, so perhaps if this was a bear, maybe it lost interest, it realized someone was in the back. Except it doesn't seem like this man was necessarily yelling out and asserting that aggressive, "I am bigger than you" vibe, which you're supposed to employ against bears when they get a little too bold towards you. Where if this is indeed a Sasquatch, hypothetically, maybe it was just checking to see if anyone was presently residing in the vehicle. It's similar to what they do with cabins. I interpret it as they walk around a cabin, they're smacking the walls because they're trying to instigate a reaction, try to see if there's someone inside, so to speak. But It's difficult to say for sure, especially because, well, we're not there. But what I can confidently say is that I would be terrified if I was in this individual's position where you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, no cell service, out of gas, and something walks up and is smacking away, trying to smash its way into your vehicle. I would be terrified, and I would be hiding just the same. So our next experience, this goes back just over a decade. Now, this individual was out camping in the colder months when some very strange things began happening. And I quote, "I was off to do some winter camping, which I love to do. It was late February of 2009, I believe, and there was nobody around to be seen. We got there and started setting up camp, and this was around 1 p.m. I heard what you assumed was an elk bugle off in the distance, so I cracked some huge rock to semi-replicate gunshots. The beat I could just to basically let the wildlife know I was there, and then continued to settle in. Over the next few hours, the sound got closer and closer, and at first, my dog was running free, not a care in the world. My dog Loki had tried mountain lions and run off bears. He was fearless, just for context. Now, the sounds got closer and closer, and got to a point it sounded like 20 yards away or so at best I could guess. It would call like every 30 to 45 minutes at first, and my dog stopped running like he was and started circling only the immediate campsite. Now, after a couple hours of this, the sound started to sound like a multi-pitched whistle, almost like a wooden train whistle, best way I can describe it. By about 6:30 p.m., it would call out, and about 15 minutes later, there was a reply from about the equal distance on the opposite side of us. And it went on for a while, back and forth. By 11 p.m., there was at least 5 different calls around our camp, all similar sounding, but distinctly different and unique. And that's when we started to record audio, lost over the years, but at this point, my dog was acting a bit skittish and would go maybe more than 15 feet away from the truck, and its tail kind of tucked, which was very out of character for him. I started to feel a bit unsettled, and around midnight, I started my truck and started loading my stuff because I had a deep gut feeling something was about to happen and I couldn't shake it. So I got the dog and girlfriend in the truck while I was packing. Out of nowhere, this loud crunching sound, and then through the air, a log came flying from the direction of one of the whistles I had been hearing. Came a big log, like 8 to 10 inches in diameter and maybe 6 feet long, way too big for a human to throw the way this thing flew. It smashed the back window of my 4Runner and dented the side panel around the window pretty bad as well, so it had some extreme force. Needless to say, I jumped in the driver's seat, got the F out of there, and drove 2 hours home non-stop. I was terrified. I left half of my supplies in the camp and never looked back. I still haven't returned to this day. This took place at Sullivan Lake in Washington State. And if you know the area, it is a wild, wild area to the locals. You know not to tent camp, but bring heavy artillery if you do, which I only learned years later. Anyways, I later showed a group of rangers my audio, and 3 of the 4 tried to tell me, oh, it was a screech owl, or it was this or that. But the one ranger particular kind of went a bit white and stayed quiet. When the other 3 went and got in their rigs, he told me I can't tell you what I think it was, but I will say you are very lucky to have gotten out of there. He also saw the side of my 4Runner, which I had taped over the broken window while sitting in the parking lot, so I can confirm the Sasquatch bit with other experiences and sightings in those mountains. It's the only thing that makes sense, but I've never to this day heard any other audio that sounds like what I heard that night. End quote. Reuben and I have discussed animal vocalizations many times before. I've even quizzed him on an episode with a few unrecognizable animal calls, and it's quite interesting how a case of misidentification can take place basically when it comes to animals and their vocalizations. I say this because this individual did everything textbook, if you ask me. Bang some rocks, let the wildlife know he was nearby, which is great because you don't want bigger animals like bears or wolves or anything to just walk in surprise, especially, bears are the main one. You want everything around you to know that, hey, there's something there, we're going to kind of keep our distance and steer clear. It's also important to remember that the majority of folks that go into these areas to camp, these very remote, wilder spots, how many of them are from the city? How many don't believe, or how would you ever expect a Sasquatch or even a dogman to appear? It's on the back of everyone's mind. I'm not saying that's the same case here, but your mind is going to try and rationalize what you are hearing and or even seeing. It's going to take everything that we know and understand through years and years and years of learning in schools and society and whatnot, and we're going to try and rationalize and create what that is. In this case, it was misidentification at the start, thinking, okay, maybe it's just this type of animal making sounds. We're going to let it know that we're here, but it's not the case. Now, the big red flag here is when the vocalizations start receiving answers. And this being such an unknown variable, packing up is a great idea. Again, I said textbook because I think it was smart. Human intuition, it's a very real thing. And I get that statement has a wide range of definitions, but that's because it applies in many situations. In the case here, that you know the situation is no longer in your control and you're dealing with something potentially dangerous, your fight or flight instincts will kick in, tell you to pack up and get the heck out of there. I wonder if the dog actually deterred them from escalating the situation sooner rather than later, but that is a bold assumption on my part. Ultimately, whatever these things are, most likely wanted to wait for a proper cover of darkness before getting more bold in their interactions, which, thanks to the timestamps of this experience the individual made, we can see that things got more talkative as the day progressed. Maybe it was coordination. And it's interesting where the previous experience, the gentleman talks about how it's not a language, but it is communication. And so here we have communication, and we have something leading to an ultimate situation, basically, at the end of the night. You guys got to go. Like, we're not messing around. We see people in experiences talk about being escorted out of the woods, and then there are cases that are a little bit more aggressive. People talk about how trees are pushed over in front of their vehicles while they're driving down the roads. Not in that exact moment a tree will come crashing down, but they're driving down the road on their way out, and all of a sudden a tree is across the road that wasn't there before. So whether or not these things are playing around or they just get very territorial, it's just one of those questions that we just have unanswered for the time being, because we just don't know how they act. We don't know what is going through their mind. And the only assumption that I can deduce with what I know and my personal opinion of information that I have is that they are territorial, they understand a threat, and when someone comes into their territory, sets up camp, you're going to get pissed off and you're going to want them to go. There could have been little ones. There could have been pregnant ones. I mean, there could have been any plethora of reasons why they get territorial. And it's like with any other animal, but I'm babbling on. I digress. I think that the smart thing here was that they got out of there, especially because he was with his girlfriend and the dog was getting very, very antsy. But the fact that they actually got as far as assaulting the vehicle, that tells me that you don't want to go back. That's a very, very dangerous situation. You've heard that line, like, don't poke the bear. Well, don't poke the Sasquatch in this case, but I digress. That's everything for this week's episode. Remember, you can find us on all our social media channels, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, as well as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Patreon. And if you wish to reach us directly, you can, CryptidClues@gmail.com, and our website, CryptidClues.ca. Now, if everything goes according to plan, I have a guest that will be joining in the next few weeks to tell us about a Sasquatch experience that her parents had while out camping a couple decades ago. And shout out to my sister for this, because my sister is she's been working out in the community a little bit, and it just happened to just pop into conversation, which I think is wonderful. I love when you're just with friends and this topic comes into play and it's never popped into conversation before. It gets exciting and it's fun to understand and take in new opinions and perspectives, and sometimes new experiences, which is exactly what this individual has. So they've agreed to come on the show, and I'm looking forward to it. But until then, everyone, take care and stay safe.